The red brick house I paid off with 30 years of sweat suddenly felt like a prison when my daughter-in-law looked up. She smiled thinly and said, "You are lucky we let you stay." She did not know she had just signed her own eviction notice. I worked 3 jobs to keep this roof. I decide who stays and who goes. My name is Margaret Maggie O'Connell. I am 62 years old, a widow, and I have lived in Lakehaven for nearly 40 years. My home is a sturdy 3-story brick structure that stands on a corner lot, a building I paid for with 3 decades of blistered hands and double shifts. It was supposed to be my fortress. The arrangement seemed simple on paper. I occupied the ground floor, which had been converted into a self-contained unit. My son, Dylan, and his wife, Harper, had taken over the 2nd floor. The 3rd floor remained a rental unit to help cover the property taxes. Dinner that evening was taking place in the main kitchen on the ground floor, a space that still smelled of the roast chicken and rosemary I had spent 2 hours preparing. The only sound in the room was the scrape of stainless steel against china and the low, persistent hum of the refrigerator. The air felt thick enough to choke on. Harper wiped the corner of her mouth with a napkin and gestured vaguely at the wall separating the living room from the hallway. "We are going to take that wall down next week," she announced, her voice casual, as if she were discussing the weather. "It makes the flow terrible. We need an open concept for when we entertain." I stopped chewing. That was a load-bearing wall. Jack and I had checked the blueprints 20 years ago. "Harper, you cannot just knock that down," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It holds up the 2nd floor joists. Besides, this is the main structure of the house." Harper placed her fork down. She did not look at Dylan. She looked directly at me, her eyes flat and devoid of warmth. "We can do whatever is necessary to improve the asset value." "Maggie," she said, "honestly, you are lucky we let you stay here at all given the market rates." My fork slipped from my numb fingers and hit the plate with a sharp clatter that echoed off the cabinets. The piece of chicken in my mouth turned to cold ash. I could not swallow. The refrigerator hummed louder, a drilling noise that bored straight into my skull. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but her face remained impassive. They no longer saw this as my home. To them, I was an occupant. I looked at my son. Dylan was my boy, the child I had wrapped in blankets during the freeze of '98 when the furnace died. "Dylan," I asked. He shifted in his chair, refusing to meet my eyes. He picked at the skin of his chicken. It makes sense to modernize. Mom, Harper has some great ideas for the equity." "The equity belongs to me," I said, my voice hardening. "The deed has my name on it. Only my name." Harper sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience one might use with a toddler. "For now. But we need to discuss restructuring the ownership for tax purposes. And let's be realistic. Maggie, a woman of your age living alone, it does not look good. Courts often find that elderly people living in these conditions lack the capacity to make sound financial decisions." A cold shiver went down my spine, sharper than any winter draft. She was not just talking about renovation. She was talking about competence. "I am perfectly capable," I whispered. Harper stood up. She gathered her plate and Dylan's plate, stacking them efficiently. "We will discuss the legalities later. Come on. Dylan?" She turned to me, her back straight. "You can handle your own dishes down here. Right, since we are keeping things separate. She walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs to their unit, my son trailing behind her like a shadow. I sat alone at the table with the congealing remains of the roast chicken I had bought with my pension check. That night, I lay in the bedroom that used to be shared by Jack and me. It was on the ground floor now, smaller than the master suite upstairs, but it was mine. Above me, the floorboards creaked. I knew every groan of this house, but tonight, the footsteps sounded heavy, like boots marching on my chest. I stared at the ceiling in the dark. For the first time in 40 years, I felt like a tenant in my own property. I felt like a stranger sleeping in a motel room that could be revoked at checkout time. The heating vent in the corner of the room acts as an unintentional conduit for sound from the second floor. It was an old quirk of the house Jack never got around to fixing. I lay there, eyes wide open, when Harper's voice drifted down through the metal grate, muffled but distinct. "Just need the doctor to sign off on the cognitive decline paperwork," she was saying. "Once the court grants guardianship, the house is legally ours to manage. He's already writing the report. But she's my mother." "Harper." Dylan's voice was a weak murmur. "She is a liability." "Dylan." Harper cut him off. "Imagine the nursing home fees if we don't control the assets now. She should be grateful we are willing to keep her on the ground floor for now. You heard her about the wall. She is stuck in the past." I lay frozen in the dark. My heart hammered against my ribs. Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced them back. This was not just ingratitude. This was a strategy. They were not waiting for me to die. They were planning to bury me while I was still breathing. The silence of the house that night drove me into the past. I closed my eyes, and I was 24 years old again, sitting in a stiff wooden chair at the loan officer's desk. Lake Haven back then was not the up-and-coming neighborhood Harper bragged about to her friends. It was a place for factory workers and dreamers with empty pockets. The banker, a man with a thin mustache and a suit that smelled of stale tobacco, had looked at our application and then at Jack's hands. They were stained with grease and roughened by hard labor. "Mr. and Mrs. O'Connell," he had said, peering over his glasses. $70,000 is a significant risk for a property in that district. Jack had squeezed my hand so hard, my knuckles turned white. He looked the man in the eye. "I work double shifts on the road," Jack said. "And Maggie. She is the hardest worker you will ever meet. We will pay every cent." And we did. We paid with our youth. I remembered the smell of industrial cleaner that clung to my skin like a second layer of clothing. For years, I worked the graveyard shift at Aurora Care Logistics, lifting boxes until my lower back screamed in protest. During the day, I scrubbed toilets and floors in the wealthy houses on the north side of town. On weekends, I waited tables at a diner where the tips were mostly quarters. Jack was gone for weeks at a time, driving 18-wheelers across the interstate to keep the lights on. We were ghosts passing each other in the hallway, exchanging tired kisses and crumpled banknotes. Then came Dylan. The house ceased to be just a building and became a fortress for him. I could still see the ghost of his crib in the corner of the living room. I could trace the pencil marks on the doorframe where we measured his height every birthday. When Jack died of a stroke, the year Dylan turned 18, the world collapsed. The life insurance was barely enough to cover the funeral. The bank came calling, circling like vultures sensing a carcass. Everyone told me to sell. They said a widow could not maintain a 3-story house alone. I looked at the papers, and I thought of Jack's grease-stained hands. I am not selling, I told the probate lawyer. This is all my son has left of his father. I remembered the winter the furnace died. It was 10 degrees below zero outside. We could not afford a repairman. I hung heavy blankets over the windows and boiled pots of water on the stove to generate heat. Dylan and I huddled under 3 layers of quilts on the living room floor. He was shivering, his teeth chattering in the dark. "Mum, it is so cold," he had whispered. I held him tight, rubbing his back to keep the blood flowing. "I know, baby, I know," I said, my own voice trembling. "But we are keeping the house. One day this will all be yours. I promise." When he got into architecture school 3 states away, I did not hesitate. I took a second mortgage. I picked up more cleaning shifts. I ate instant noodles for dinner so he could buy drafting supplies and textbooks. I believed that every blister on my hand was a brick in his future foundation. I replaced the broken window panes myself to save money. I learned to fix the plumbing when the pipes leaked. I knew the heartbeat of this house because I was the one keeping it alive. 5 years ago, the letter came from the bank. The mortgage was paid in full. I bought a single vanilla cupcake from the bakery down the street. I sat on the front porch steps as the sun went down and lit a single candle. "Jack," I whispered to the empty air, tears running down my face. "Jack, we did it. We kept it." That memory burned in my chest now as I lay in the dark. Every beam, every brick, every shingle was paid for with my life. For Harper to stand there with her manicured hands and say I was lucky they let me stay was not just an insult. It was a desecration. She was walking on floors I had scrubbed on my hands and knees for 30 years. And she had the audacity to call herself the owner. She did not know the cost of the ground she stood on, but I did. And I was starting to realize that the love that built this house might have to turn into something much colder to save it. The invasion of my home did not happen with a kick to the door. It happened with a smile and a suitcase. 6 months ago. Dylan stood on my porch, his shoulders slumped, holding a box of personal effects from the architecture firm that had just let him go. I opened the door wide. I did not see a failure. I saw my son. I saw a chance to have family fill the empty rooms again. "Come home," I had told them. "We will figure it out." For the first few weeks, it was almost perfect. Harper called me Mom Maggie and filled the house with the smell of cinnamon rolls. She insisted on cleaning the windows and organized the linen closet. When she suggested they take the second floor so they could have a little independence while we get back on our feet, I handed over the keys without a second thought. I wanted them to feel dignified. But the sweetness was just the anesthetic before the surgery. The first cut was the locks. I came home from grocery shopping one afternoon to find my key would not turn in the door at the top of the stairs leading to the second floor. "Oh, sorry," Mum, Maggie Harper chirped, leaning over the banister. "We changed the cylinder. Just for security. You know how paranoid I get. You do not need to come up here anyway." "Right. We want to keep our mess to ourselves." I nodded slowly, feeling foolish standing in my own hallway. Then came the third floor. Mr. Henderson had been renting the attic apartment for 5 years. He was quiet and paid in cash on the first of the month. Harper told me he had to go. "We need the space for storage." "Mom," she said, her voice firm. "Plus, having a stranger walking through the house. It is not safe. Dylan needs total focus to find a new job." Mr. Henderson moved out. The rent money stopped coming in, but the bills did not. We put the internet and water in your name. Maggie. Harper told me one morning, sliding a stack of envelopes across the counter. It is just simpler that way, since you are the primary owner on record. Oh, and I will hold on to the secondary debit card for the house account. I can help you pay everything online. It is so much faster than you writing checks. It sounded helpful. I let her take the card. I felt grateful that someone was helping me navigate the digital world. I did not realize I was handing over the keys to my wallet. Then came the rules. Mum, could you not run the washing machine between 9 and 5? Harper asked. The vibration disturbs Dylan. Mum, please keep the TV volume down after 9 o'clock at night. We need our rest. Mum, you really should have asked before inviting Mrs. Rosa over. We were not prepared for guests. I found myself tiptoeing in my own kitchen. I stopped listening to the radio while I cooked. I felt like a naughty child in a boarding school. The erasure of my history was next. I came home one day to find the heavy velvet curtains I had sewn myself piled in the trash. The oak banister was being painted a stark, sterile white. And on the front door, a wooden sign swung in the breeze. The Quinn home. Quinn is Harper's last name. I touched the sign, my finger tracing the letters. But, "This is the O'Connell house," I said. Harper walked past me with a bucket of paint. She shrugged. "It is a rebrand." "Mum, new era. It sounds more modern." I looked at Dylan, who was sanding the doorframe. He looked tired. "Dylan," I asked. He stopped sanding but did not look at me. "Mum, just bear with it. Okay, please. We are under a lot of pressure. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I swallowed the lump in my throat. I was the burden. I was the old furniture that did not fit the renovation. The breaking point of my patience, or perhaps my denial, came on Tuesday morning. I walked into the kitchen to make coffee. My cabinet, the one where I kept my spices, my jar of tea bags, and my favorite mugs, was empty. My things were shoved into a cardboard box on the floor in the corner. The shelves were now lined with glass jars of organic pasta and expensive quinoa. "Harper," I called out. She walked in, wearing her silk robe. "Oh, good morning. I needed a pantry for our dietary supplements and dry goods. I moved your stuff to the corner. You cook so simply now. You really do not need all that space." I stared at the box on the floor. My life, packed away to make room for her quinoa. And actually, she continued, leaning against the counter and sipping her matcha tea, "We need to talk about the sleeping arrangements. The master bedroom downstairs. It is too big for one person. We are going to need it for a nursery eventually. There is that small room behind the kitchen, the old maid's room. It would be cozier for you, less to clean." I looked at her. That room was barely big enough for a twin bed. It had no windows. "You want me to move into the storage room?" I asked, my voice trembling. Harper smiled that thin, terrifying smile. "It is not a storage room, Maggie. It is a compact living space. Honestly." She let out a short, sharp laugh. "You are lucky we let you stay in the main house at all. Most children would have put you in a home by now." There it was again. The sentence that was becoming her mantra. I looked at the box of my belongings on the floor, and for the first time, I did not feel sad. I felt the cold, hard click of a lock turning in my heart. They were not family. They were invaders. The envelope looked innocent enough. It was a standard business letter from a bank I did not bank with, mixed in with a stack of flyers for pizza coupons and landscaping services. I almost threw it away, but something about the weight of the paper made me pause. I tore it open, standing right there on the porch. It was a notification of approval for a home equity line of credit. The amount was $180,000. The borrowers listed were Margaret O'Connell and Dylan Quinn. My hands started to shake. I had not signed for a loan. I had not been to a bank in years except to deposit my pension. I walked up the stairs to the second floor, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Dylan was sitting at the kitchen island. Harper was chopping vegetables. "What is this?" I asked, throwing the letter onto the marble counter. Dylan looked at the paper, and the colour drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Harper, however, did not even flinch. She picked up the letter, scanned it briefly, and let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she said. "Banks make administrative errors all the time. I told them to run a credit check on Dylan, not you. They must have linked the files because of the address. It says approved." "Harper," I said, my voice rising. "It says $180,000. That is a lien on my house. I will call them right now and sort it out," she said, snatching the envelope from my hand before I could grab it back. "Do not worry your head about it, Mom. You really do not understand how these modern financial products work." She tucked the letter into her apron pocket and turned back to her vegetables. Dylan stared at the countertop. That night, the air was thick and humid. I went out to the backyard to water the hydrangeas, needing to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house. The basement window, which sat just above ground level near the flower bed, was cracked open a few inches. A beam of yellow light cut through the darkness. I heard Harper's voice. She was not talking to the bank. "Look, Chase, it does not matter," she was saying. "Just make sure the report emphasizes the disorientation. We need the judge to see that she is a flight risk if left unsupervised. Once the court grants the guardianship, we control the assets. The loan will not be an issue because I will have power of attorney to ratify it." I froze. The water from the hose ran over my feet, soaking my slippers, but I did not feel the cold. "Yes," she continued. "We used Dr. Evans. You know, the one Dylan helped out with that zoning permit last year. He owes us. He is willing to sign off on the cognitive decline. Just make it sound convincing. Say she gets lost in her own neighborhood." I dropped the hose. The metal nozzle hit the dirt with a thud, but she did not hear it. Guardianship. They were not just stealing my money. They were stealing my personhood. The next morning, I watched the mailbox like a hawk. When the mail carrier arrived, I got there before Harper could descend from her tower. I sifted through the bills until I found it. A thick, brown envelope from the county court. I opened it in the safety of my bathroom with the door locked. It was a summons for a hearing on civil capacity. The petitioner was Dylan Quinn. The date was 3 weeks away. If I had not found this, the hearing would have happened without me, and the judge would have ruled in their favor by default. I went back to my room and dug out the old file where I kept the original deed to the house. I remembered the loan document Harper had snatched. I had seen the signature at the bottom. It had looked shaky, trembling. I pulled out a magnifying glass and looked at my old tax returns. Then I remembered the scanner Dylan had set up in their office. They had not forged my signature by hand. They had taken a scan of my signature from an old check, pixelated and shaky from the transfer, and pasted it onto the loan application. I waited until Harper went out for her yoga class. I found Dylan in the living room. I held up the court summons. "Dylan," I said. He looked up, and his eyes filled with tears. "Mum." He started. "Mum, please. You are trying to have me declared incompetent," I said. The words tasted like bile. "You forged my signature on a loan for $180,000. You are going to put me in a home so you can rent out my floor." He put his head in his hands. "We are drowning in debt." "Mum," he sobbed. "The crypto investments. They crashed. We need the equity. It is just financial restructuring. You would be safe." "The facility is nice," Harper said. Harper said. I repeated. I looked at my son, a grown man, crying because he got caught stealing his mother's life. "You did not need arsenic," I whispered. "You just needed a judge." I walked away from him. I went into my room and wedged a chair under the doorknob. I sat on the edge of my bed. My hands were trembling, not from age, but from rage. They planned to erase me with paperwork. They thought I was a confused old woman who would sign anything. They were about to find out that I read the fine print. I sat in the dark living room, the shadows stretching across the floor like the bars of a cell. My mind replayed a terrifying film on loop. I saw Harper walking through these rooms, wearing her sharp blazer, gesturing to a real estate agent, while I sat strapped into a wheelchair in some sterile facility that smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. I imagined someone guiding my hand to sign a deed I could not read. I would be a ghost before I was even dead. I tried to reach out for help, but the world felt deaf. Earlier that afternoon, while they were out, I had called a hotline for elder protection services. The voice on the other end was robotic and detached. "If you are in immediate danger, hang up and dial 911, the recording said." When I finally got a human, she sounded exhausted. "Ma'am," without physical bruising or direct evidence of theft. "It is a civil matter," she told me. "You can come into our office between 9 and 5 to file a report." I hung up. How could I go to an office between 9 and 5 when my jailers watched my every move? I went to see Pastor Thomas at the parish I had attended for 40 years. I sat in his office, twisting a tissue in my hands, and whispered about my fears. He looked at me with pity, but it was the wrong kind. "Maggie," he said softly, "families go through hard times. Dylan is your son. Scripture tells us that love bears all things, perhaps. Perhaps you are misunderstanding their intentions. We must be careful not to bear false witness against our own blood." I left the church feeling smaller than when I entered. I felt ashamed, as if my survival instinct was a sin. That night, the house was empty. Dylan and Harper had gone to a dinner party. I crept upstairs to the second floor. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I went into the room that used to be Dylan's bedroom, but was now their home office. I opened the bottom drawer of the filing desk. It was a mess of crumpled papers. I found credit card statements. 1, 2, 5 of them, all maxed out. Then I found the emails printed out from a crypto exchange. The numbers were staggering. They had lost nearly everything. The $180,000 from the equity line was not sitting in a savings account. It was already gone, burned to ash to cover their mistakes. Then I saw the laptop on Harper's desk. It was in sleep mode. I tapped the spacebar, and it woke up. She had left an Excel spreadsheet open. The title was Asset Liquidity Projection. My eyes scanned the rows until I found Scenario A. It read, Guardianship approval 6 to 8 weeks. Transfer Maggie to State Facility B. Renovate ground floor. Projected rental income $2,200 a month. And there, in the notes column, typed in Harper's font, was a single sentence: Mum should be grateful we are handling the transition for her. I stepped back, my hand covering my mouth to stifle a scream. It was not a slip of the tongue at dinner. It was a business plan. The humiliation I felt was hot and suffocating. They looked at me and saw a line item. They saw a revenue stream. I went back downstairs and stood in the center of the living room. The silence was heavy. For a moment, a wave of exhaustion hit me so hard I almost fell. It would be so easy to stop fighting. It would be so easy to let the current take me. I could just sign the papers. I could let them win. At least the fear would stop. Then I looked at the fireplace mantel. There was a photo of Jack, taken a week before he died. I remembered his hand in mine, his grip weak but his eyes fierce. Maggie. He had rasped, struggling for air. You worked too hard. Do not ever let anyone take our house. Promise me. The memory hit me like a splash of ice water. If I gave up now, I was not just losing a house. I was erasing Jack's life. I was erasing my own existence. I wiped my face. The shame evaporated, replaced by a cold, steel resolve. I was not alone. I remembered Rosa, my neighbor 2 doors down. She was a fiery woman from Mexico who spent her retirement volunteering at a legal aid center downtown. She had told me once about the cases she saw. People think old means stupid. Rosa had said, "We teach them otherwise." I looked at the phone. It was late, but I did not care. I was not going to be a victim in a tragedy anymore. I was going to be the protagonist in a war. I am not finished, I whispered to the empty room. I am just getting started. The next morning, Rosa drove me downtown in her battered sedan. We stopped in front of a weathered brick building that looked like it had survived as many storms as I had. The sign above the frosted glass door read, Legal Care Lake Haven. It was a non-profit legal aid center, the kind of place that smelled of old coffee and desperate hope. Inside, the waiting room walls were plastered with flyers. My eyes drifted to a bright yellow one near the water cooler. It said in bold black letters, Elder Financial Abuse, Know the Signs. I read the bullet points: unexplained withdrawals, changes in wills, missing property, anxiety around family members. A cold shiver went through me. I was not looking at a flyer. I was looking at a biography of my last 6 months. We were ushered into a small office cluttered with file boxes. Attorney Caldwell stood up to shake my hand. She was a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun, but her eyes were kind. "Sit down." "Mrs. O'Connell," she said. "Rosa told me you are in trouble. Start from the beginning. Do not leave anything out." I took a deep breath. For the next hour, I poured out everything. I told her about the wall Harper wanted to knock down. I told her about the rules, the locks, and the pantry. I told her about the HELOC letter and the conversation I heard through the basement window. Finally, I repeated the sentence that had haunted me. She said I was lucky they let me stay. I whispered, staring at my hands. Caldwell did not look shocked. She looked angry. She leaned forward, clasping her hands on the desk. "Mrs. O'Connell, what you are describing is textbook elder financial abuse," Caldwell said, her voice firm. "And the guardianship petition that is predatory. They are banking on the court seeing a frail old woman. They think you are weak, so you will be easy to trick. But you are very lucid. I placed the HELOC letter and the copy of the loan agreement on her desk. She put on her reading glasses and examined the signature at the bottom. She pulled a magnifying glass from her drawer, just as I had done. "This is a digital paste," she said, tapping the paper. "See the pixelation on the tail of the Y. This is a forgery, or at the very least, an abuse of a power of attorney you never knowingly granted. We need to contact the bank immediately to freeze this. It will trigger a fraud investigation." "But Dylan—" I started, my voice wavering. "He could go to jail." "He dug that hole himself." "Maggie," Rosa said from the corner. Caldwell nodded. "We need a strategy. First, we file an objection to the guardianship. I will arrange for an independent competency evaluation with a neurologist we trust. We will prove you are sound of mind. Second, we need to clarify the legal standing of everyone in that house. Right now, it is muddy. We need to establish a landlord-tenant relationship. You are the sole owner. They are guests who have overstayed their welcome." She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. "I also suggest a defensive maneuver regarding the asset itself." Caldwell continued. "We should move the title of the house into a trust. Let's call it the O'Connell Trust. You will be the trustee, but we will name a charitable organization as the beneficiary upon your death. Not your son." "A charity?" I asked. "If the house is in a trust with a specific beneficiary, even if Dylan somehow manages to get guardianship later, he cannot sell the house or borrow against it easily because the asset belongs to the trust. Not you personally," Caldwell explained. "It is an iron shield. It tells the court and him that there is no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow." I thought about it. I thought about the homeless women's shelter, Harbour House, that Jack used to donate to every Christmas. "Do it?" I said. "Make Harbour House the beneficiary." Caldwell smiled. "Excellent. Now, one last thing. I need you to document everything. If they threaten you, if they mention the facility, if they talk about the house like it is already theirs, I need it on tape. New York is a one-party consent state for recording. You are the one party." I signed the representation papers with a steady hand. For the first time in months, the pen did not feel heavy. It felt like a sword. When we walked out into the bright sunlight of the parking lot, the air felt different. I felt lighter. Rosa unlocked her car door and looked at me over the roof. "Maggie," she said, her dark eyes flashing. "Now it is their turn to be afraid. But we do not need poison or guns." She tapped the folder of documents in my hand. "We have the law. That is how civilized women take revenge." I clutched the folder to my chest. "Yes," I said. "It is." The war for my house moved from the open battlefield to the shadows. I became an actress in my own life. When Harper talked about how they would knock down the kitchen wall once the paperwork settles, I did not argue. I simply nodded and sipped my tea. "You are right, dear," I would say, keeping my eyes on my knitting. I suppose I'm too old to manage such a big space anyway. It was the performance of a lifetime. It made them careless. While they were at work or at the gym, I was moving pieces on the chessboard. I told them I was going to the market or for physical therapy, but I was actually at the bank. I closed the savings account Harper had access to. I moved every cent of my life savings, $45,000, to a new credit union across town. I changed my passwords to a combination of letters and numbers they would never guess. Next came the eyes and ears. I hired a local handyman, a friend of Rosa, to come over while Dylan and Harper were at a weekend brunch. We installed tiny cameras. One went inside the pot of the artificial ficus plant in the hallway. Another went inside the face of the old grandfather clock in the living room. Now. Every time Harper screamed at me because I left a spoon in the sink, the clock was watching. Every time Dylan whispered to her about putting Mom in the facility by Christmas, the ficus plant was listening. Attorney Caldwell was moving just as fast on the legal front. We filed an objection to the guardianship petition. I went to an independent neurologist, a stern man who spent 2 hours testing my memory and cognitive function. His report was clear. I had arthritis in my knees and high blood pressure, but my mind was as sharp as a tack. Then came the banking freeze. Caldwell sent a formal letter to the lender regarding the home equity line of credit, alleging fraud and requesting an immediate stay on the funds. I was in the kitchen when Harper found out. She was trying to transfer money on her phone. She frowned, tapping the screen aggressively. "Damn it," she muttered. "System error. Why is the account frozen?" She looked at me, suspicion flickering in her eyes for a second. I just continued wiping the counter, humming a hymn. "Probably just a glitch," she said, dismissing me as too incompetent to cause such trouble. But my biggest move was the trust. I sat in Caldwell's office and signed the deed transfer. My house now belonged to the Maggie O'Connell Trust. The terms were ironclad. Upon my death, the property would not go to Dylan Quinn. It would go to Harbour House, a charity for homeless women. Even if they won guardianship, they would inherit nothing but a caretaker role for a charity asset. I also made a move to reassert my status as the landlord. I found a tenant for the 3rd floor, Lorraine, a retired schoolteacher with a kind face and a steady pension, signed a lease agreement that clearly listed me, Margaret O'Connell, as the landlord. "Welcome to the building," I told her. "I apologize in advance for the noise on the 2nd floor. My guests are leaving soon." Finally, I needed the smoking gun. I needed Harper to say it on tape. On a Tuesday evening, I stood near the grandfather clock. Harper was coming down the stairs, looking irritated. "Harper," I said, making my voice sound small and annoying. "The roof might need repairs before winter. It will cost about $3,000. I think you should pay half." She stopped. Her face turned red. She marched over to me, invading my personal space. "Are you kidding me?" she hissed. "We are not paying a dime. You have no money. Maggie, you are broke." "But it is my house," I said, baiting the trap. "It is barely your house," she shouted. "You should be thanking us on your knees. You should be grateful we even let you stay here. Once the guardianship papers are signed, we will decide where you live, and it won't be here. It will be the cheapest room we can find so we can rent this floor out." The clock ticked. The camera inside recorded every word, every drop of venom. The night before the hearing, I sat in my living room. The floor was covered with stacks of paper. The neurologist's report, the trust documents, the camera footage on a USB drive, the letter from the bank. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. I was trembling with the adrenaline of a soldier cleaning her rifle before the dawn raid. I was terrified of losing my son. Yes. But the woman who sat there that night was no longer a victim. I was the landlord, and eviction day was coming. 3 days before the hearing. Harper slapped a glossy brochure onto the kitchen island. It slid across the cold marble and stopped right in front of my coffee mug. The cover featured a stock photo of a smiling elderly couple playing chess under an impossibly green tree. The title read, Silver Creek, Luxury Senior Living. If the judge rules in our favor. At least you will be somewhere nice, Harper said, not bothering to look at me as she poured herself a glass of filtered water. Honestly, you should be grateful we are looking into the premium package. Most children would just dump you in state care and forget the address. She did not wait for a response. She walked away, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor like a countdown clock. That Saturday, she decided to host a cocktail hour for her friends. I was effectively demoted to the help. I stood at the sink scrubbing wine glasses while a dozen strangers walked through my home. Harper led them around like a museum curator. Oh yes, we just unlocked some significant equity. I heard her brag from the living room. We are planning to blow out the back wall for a sunroom next spring. It will really open up the flow. I gripped the sponge so hard water dripped onto the floor. She was spending money she did not have on a house she did not own. The tension snapped on Tuesday night. Harper found me reading in the kitchen and slid a stack of documents under my nose. Insurance updates, she said, her voice tight. Sign the bottom so we can lower the premium. I did not even look at the text. I pushed the papers back. My lawyer, Mrs. Caldwell, reads everything before I sign anything, I said calmly. Harper slammed her hand onto the table. The noise made me jump. Stop playing games! Maggie, she shouted. Do you realize how precarious your position is? Do you know we can have you removed? We can have the sheriff drag you out of here for your own safety if you cannot cooperate. Dylan walked in from the hallway. I looked at him, hoping for a defense, but I found only resentment. He looked at me with eyes that were red and tired. You are so selfish, he spat out. The words hit me harder than Harper's hand on the table. You would rather leave your money to some strangers in a trust than help your own flesh and blood. You live under this roof because we agree to it. Do not forget that. I paid for this roof. Dylan, I said softly. You lived in the past, he yelled. This is about my future. The next morning, Caldwell called me. Her voice was bright, almost cheerful. Maggie, you are not going to believe this, she said. They just filed a formal eviction notice against you. They are trying to kick you out of the ground floor unit before the guardianship hearing even happens. My stomach dropped. Can they do that? No. Caldwell laughed. But here is the best part. To prove they have the standing to evict you, they attached the HELOC agreement to the filing as proof of joint ownership. They just submitted the forged document into the court record voluntarily. They just handed us the gun they used to rob the bank. I hung up the phone. They were so arrogant they did not even realize they had walked into a trap. The night before the trial, the house was loud. I heard the distinct pop of a champagne cork from the second floor. Harper's laughter drifted down through the vents, sharp and piercing. She still thinks she owns the place. Harper's voice echoed. Just wait until she sees the judge's order tomorrow. I cannot wait to see her face. I could not sleep. I went into the kitchen for a glass of water around midnight. Dylan was there, leaning against the counter, staring into the darkness of the backyard. He jumped when he saw me. Dylan? I said. He did not turn around. I have one question. I asked. If the court grants you guardianship tomorrow, what will you do with me? Really? The silence stretched for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Finally, he turned. He looked at me, but I saw no recognition in his eyes. I was just an obstacle, I will do what is necessary for my future, he said. It was the final cut. The umbilical cord did not sever at birth. It severed right there. In the kitchen I had fed him in for 30 years. The next morning, we met in the hallway. I was wearing my best Sunday suit. Harper was dressed in a sharp navy blazer, looking every inch the concerned, responsible guardian. She stopped as she brushed past me, checking her reflection in the mirror. "You are still lucky we let you stay here until this very minute," she said, smoothing her hair. "Enjoy the ride to the courthouse. Maggie, it is the last time you will be coming back here without a chaperone." She walked out the door. She had no idea that luck had nothing to do with what was about to happen. The family court hearing room was smaller than I expected. It smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. Judge Carver, a man with deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes that had seen too many broken families, sat behind the high bench. He leafed through the thick file in front of him. From his vantage point, the optics were clear. On one side sat a young, well-dressed couple, looking concerned and responsible. On the other side sat an old woman in a grey suit, clutching a purse. For the first 20 minutes, I felt the walls closing in. Harper sat in the witness box, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "It breaks our hearts. Your Honor," Harper said, her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "Mom Maggie. She leaves the stove on. She wanders out into the street at night. We just want to ensure she is safe. We want to protect the assets for her care." Dylan nodded vigorously from the plaintiff's table. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, listening to them dismantle my dignity brick by brick. They painted a picture of a senile, helpless woman who needed a keeper. Then, Attorney Caldwell stood up. She walked to the center of the room like a gladiator entering the arena. "Your Honor, we would like to call Dr. Aris, the court-appointed neurologist, to the stand," she said. Dr. Aris was brief and brutal. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the judge. "I spent 3 hours evaluating Mrs. O'Connell. Her cognitive recall is in the 95th percentile for her age. She is sharp, rational, and fully capable of understanding complex financial instruments. There is zero evidence of dementia." Harper shifted in her seat. The colour began to drain from her cheeks. Caldwell did not stop there. "I would like to play a recording taken on the evening of October 12th inside the O'Connell residence. This speaks to the true motivation behind this petition." She pressed a button on her laptop. The sound of my grandfather clock ticking filled the courtroom, followed by Harper's voice, loud and clear, distorted slightly by the echo of the hallway. "Mothers should be grateful we even let you stay here. Once the guardianship papers are signed, we will decide where you live, and it won't be here. It will be the cheapest room we can find, so we can rent this floor out." The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Carver slowly lowered his reading glasses. He looked at Harper, who was now gripping the railing of the witness box, her knuckles white. "Mrs. Quinn," the judge said, his voice dangerously low. "Is that your voice? I was emotional." Harper stammered. "It was taken out of context." "The context seems quite clear," Caldwell interjected. She then called the bank's fraud investigator to the stand. He held up the HELOC application. "We have analysed the digital footprint of this document," the investigator stated. "The signature of Mrs. O'Connell was lifted from a tax document dated 4 years prior and digitally pasted onto this loan agreement. It is a clumsy forgery." Caldwell turned to Dylan. My son was sweating now, loosening his tie. "Mr. Quinn?" Caldwell asked. Where is the $180,000 from this loan? We invested it, Dylan whispered. You spent it, Caldwell corrected. Credit card debt, luxury car leases, failed crypto schemes. You drained your mother's equity without her knowledge. That is not guardianship, Mr. Quinn. That is grand larceny. Judge Carver leaned forward. Mr. Quinn, do you believe this house belongs to you? Dylan looked up, desperation in his eyes. Well, yes, eventually. We are the young ones. We have a future to build. We deserve. He stopped, realizing he had just said the quiet part out loud. You deserve nothing that you do not earn. Judge Carver snapped. Caldwell delivered the final blow. She placed a document on the judge's bench. Furthermore, Your Honor, the eviction notice Mr. Quinn filed is invalid. He is not a co-owner. He is not even a landlord. The property is held by the Maggie O'Connell Trust. Mrs. O'Connell is the sole trustee. Mr. and Mrs. Quinn are merely guests who have overstayed their welcome. Judge Carver did not need to deliberate. He banged his gavel with a sound that cracked through the room like a gunshot. Petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice. He ruled. I am referring the HELOC file to the District Attorney's Office for immediate investigation into fraud and elder abuse. Mrs. O'Connell is affirmed as the sole authority over the property. He turned his gaze to Dylan and Harper. You have 30 days to vacate the premises, the judge ordered. And if I hear of one instance of harassment during that time, I will have you removed in handcuffs. As the bailiff called the next case. Harper stood up, her face twisted in fury. She took a step toward me, her hand raised as if to point a finger, but the court officer stepped between us, his hand resting on his belt. She froze, breathing hard, looking at me with pure hatred. Caldwell leaned down to my ear as I gathered my purse. The judge gave them 30 days, she whispered. But as the landlord, you can petition for an expedited removal based on the threat of violence. It is your turn to decide if they get lucky enough to stay that long. I looked at my son and his wife. They looked small. They looked like strangers. And for the first time in a year, I did not feel fear. I felt the cold, hard weight of power. 30 days was too long to live with wolves. After consulting with Caldwell, I filed an emergency motion with the court. Given the documented financial abuse and the verbal threats recorded on my camera, the judge granted an expedited order. The eviction window was reduced to 7 days. I requested a civil standby officer to ensure the order was executed without violence. Harper had no idea. She was living in a fantasy world. Just yesterday, I saw her recording a video for her social media in the corner of the living room where Jack and I used to drink our morning coffee. She had moved my armchair and replaced it with a modern beanbag. New reading nook vibes, she had chirped into her phone camera. Soon, this will really be ours. Manifesting abundance. On the morning of the 7th day, the air was crisp. I went to the closet and pulled out Jack's old flannel jacket. It was too big for me, swallowing my frame. But it smelled faintly of cedar and tobacco. It felt like armor. I picked up the thick yellow envelope from the kitchen table. Inside was the writ of execution and the formal eviction notice. A cruiser from the sheriff's department pulled up to the curb. The officer, a large man with a calm demeanor, walked up the path to stand beside me. I rang the doorbell of my own home. It took a moment. Then the door swung open. Harper stood there, hair messy, clutching a ceramic mug. She looked at the officer, and her brow furrowed. Then she looked at me, and that familiar sneer curled her lip. "What is this?" "Maggie," she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Did you lock yourself out?" "Honestly, you start some new drama every day. You should be grateful we still let you stay in the house after the stunt you pulled in court." I looked her straight in the eye. My hands did not shake. My voice did not waver. "No. Harper," I said. "You got that line wrong from the very beginning. This is my house, and you were lucky to be here longer than you deserved." I extended my hand and pressed the yellow envelope against her chest. She had to grab it or let it fall. "This is a formal order," I said, my voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. "You and Dylan are required to vacate this property immediately. You have until sundown to remove your personal effects. If you refuse, this officer will escort you off the premises in handcuffs." Harper tore open the envelope. Her eyes scanned the dense legal text. Her face went from flushed to the color of old paper. The mug in her hand tilted, spilling coffee onto her slippers. But she did not notice. "Dylan!" She screamed. It was a shrill, desperate sound. "Dylan, get down here." She shoved the paper toward the stairs, as if it were a cancer diagnosis she wanted to reject. Dylan appeared at the top of the landing. He looked terrible. His hair was matted, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. He walked down the stairs slowly, holding the banister as if he were an old man. He took the paper from Harper's shaking hands. He read it. Then he looked at me. His eyes were shattered glass. There was regret there. Yes. But also a deep, pathetic confusion. He looked like a boy who had broken a window and expected his mother to sweep up the shards. "Mom," he whispered. You are really doing this?" I looked at my son. I looked at the man who had forged my signature and planned to lock me away. "The day you and your wife sat in my kitchen and calculated my death for profit, you evicted me from your hearts," I said. I did not shout. I spoke it like a verdict. "Today, I am just doing what you did first, but I am doing it with paper and ink." The officer stepped forward. "Folks, we need to start moving. Now." Harper let out a screech and turned to run back up the stairs. "I am not leaving. I am going to smash every mom." The officer barked, moving faster than his size suggested. He blocked her path. "Do not make me arrest you for destruction of property. You will pack, peacefully, or you will leave with nothing." I stepped back onto the porch. I watched them. I watched them drag suitcases and boxes across the hardwood floors Jack had sanded by hand. I watched them shove their clothes into garbage bags. I watched the physical dismantling of their invasion. When the last box was dragged over the threshold, the sun was beginning to set. Dylan paused at the gate. He looked back at the house one last time, then at me. I did not wave. I stood still, wrapped in Jack's jacket. He got into his car. Harper was already in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her face a mask of bitter defeat. They drove away. I turned back to my door. I stepped inside and closed it firmly. The heavy click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. The house was quiet. The hum of the refrigerator returned, steady and rhythmic. The ghost of Harper's voice saying "you are lucky" faded into the walls, replaced by a beautiful, profound silence. I was alone, and I was home. Thank you so much for listening to my story, everyone. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So drop your city or state in the comments below. Let's see how far this family reaches. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button. Subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary and smash that hype button to help get this story out to more people who might need to hear it.